Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Welcome to both of you, with us until just before midnight. So to the front pages on this critical day, obviously, and the new deal between the UK and the EU on the Northern Ireland Trade Protocol is the lead story for many, including, as you can see, the Eye. The paper also points out that success hangs on the acceptance by the DUP and more hardline Tory Brexiteers. The Daily Mail asks, has the Prime Minister actually achieved the impossible? The international edition of the Financial Times says the deal eases post-Brexit tensions and hails a new chapter in relations between Brussels and London. That is also the angle taken by tomorrow's Guardian. PM hails a new chapter, as it says there. 3 years after Boris Johnson claimed there was an oven-ready deal on Northern Ireland, the Metro says we can finally put the oven on. A number of days later, as you can see there from the top banner. The Belfast Telegraph headline is Make or Break, a reference to the complex system which gives Stormont a say on how EU rules should apply. The loyalist-leaning Belfast newsletter describes it as a crunch time for unionism. And the nationalist supporting Irish News says Mr Sunak now needs the backing of unionists to get the deal through. While the Yorkshire Post devotes its front page to the death of the first woman Speaker of the Commons, Baroness Betty Boothroyd, who was born in Dewsbury 93 years ago. And finally, the Daily Star reporting that the President of Mexico says a real-life elf has been captured on camera in his country. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us, including The Star, if you have to. So let's go to the political editors then of The Guardian and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Let's go straight to the Daily Mail, shall we, Harry? Has Rishi done the impossible? A question for you.
A wise editor once told me that a headline with a question mark is never a real story. So I'm sceptical about that one. Look, we don't know. For too long, 6 long years now, 7 years if you include the referendum, we've been arguing and talking and discussing and writing about Brexit. And one thing I learned is that day one is never a good time to make a definitive judgment about how a piece of paper secured with the EU goes down. The devil is always in the details on this thing, on these things. However, I can't remember a deal coming back from Brussels being greeted so warmly, I'd say, across the political divide, leaving aside the DUP, and the fears of a Tory rebellion appear to be slightly melting away tonight because a cautious backing, I'd give it, from senior figures within the Conservative Party. The DUP have said they're going to go away and look at it and study the details, which is about as good as it gets, I think, with those guys on first impressions. And you can just see from the tone of the Prime Minister in the House of Commons tonight, he was chipper. He was, I haven't seen him like that in a long time. And sort of he was pretty pleased with himself. And he was making the point that he was the one that got the EU to do what they've been saying for 2 years they would not do, which is reopen that text of the divorce terms. And there are large concessions that the EU have given clearly on the surface of this deal that are hard for any Brexiteer to escape and any unionist to escape. So I think the government are going to be pleased with how it's gone today.
Yes, reactions still coming in all the time. We've had word from Joe Biden and now, just in the last few minutes, in fact, from President Macron of France. He says the United Kingdom and the European Union have just reached an agreement on implementing the post-Brexit framework in Northern Ireland. I welcome this important decision, which will preserve the Good Friday Agreement and protect our European internal market. No doubt more reaction, but the crux will be what the Democratic Unionist Party does, what those key Brexiteers who are following the DUP do, and whether that matters for Rishi Sunak, given he's got the support of Labour, Pippa.
Yes, I mean, this was a high-stakes move by Sunak, but there was also big wins, or there are also big wins there for him. And one of those is, as you mentioned, better relationships with the European Union, not just with the bloc, but also with the individual countries. And already the government has hailed things like, for example, the Horizon Science Project, which Britain could get back involved in now, and the fact that there might be better relations with France when it comes to cooperation of small boats. Again, working closer together on Ukraine and climate change were two of the issues that Ursula von der Leyen mentioned today in that press conference in Windsor. So there was big wins in terms of restoring relations. Also for Rishi Sunak in the whole sort of party manager side of things. For many years now, the Conservative Party has looked practically ungovernable on Brexit, and has been characterised by splits, by infighting, and frankly, with sort of the warfare that I think the public has got really fed up with over the last 6 or 7 years. So for him to be able to sort of show that he has some sort of his capacity to drive something as potentially as controversial as this through his own party could be seen as a big win. And then, of course, there's the other element of it, which is that the promise made by Boris Johnson and the Conservatives in 2019 to get Brexit done after years of sort of toing and froing over it was obviously a compelling one. It helped win him a huge majority. And so to go into the next election, lots of Conservative MPs were starting to feel a bit anxious about the fact that this aspect of Brexit hadn't yet been resolved. And to go into the next election and have the Labour Party, which you mentioned there, Anna, being able to turn around and say, look, they still haven't got Brexit done. It's still not working. It was obviously the Boris Johnson oven-ready deal that brought forward the protocol and brought that controversial border down the Irish Sea, was an electoral gift to Labour and a big problem for the Conservatives. And lots of backbenchers, including some really quite firm lifelong Brexiteers, have recognised this. And that's why the timing, I think, works for Sunak on this. He doesn't have the same sort of backdrop of the party that some of his predecessors had when it came to getting any Brexit deals through. And he's got plenty of his, the sort of the main rump, really, of the Conservative Party recognise that this has to be seen to be resolved ahead of the next election. The public has no patience with this anymore. So across the board, there were big wins here, and that's why he decided to push on and do this.
Yeah, the Daily Mail chose to show a picture of Ursula von der Leyen meeting King Charles. The Financial Times, meanwhile, with a picture of Rishi Sunak and Ursula von der Leyen. Dear Rishi, I mean, he's charmed her, clearly, don't you think? But obviously, she has had to deal with, David Davis, Liam Fox, Lord Frost, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. Perhaps he is a welcome change, who knows? But anyway, Boris Johnson, the Mail tells us, kept his counsel on the proposals. Does he look churlish now, do you think, waving the flag for his Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which was always seen as a weapon to hold against the feet of the European Union? Should he not have bothered with trying to fight for it, do you think? Rishi Sunak making quite clear it's irrelevant now.
Well, it's irrelevant now because he's got a deal. It wasn't irrelevant 48 hours ago. It wasn't relevant a week ago. And Rishi Sunak, in fact, multiple times in the Commons tonight, made very clear that he believes the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill created the conditions, to quote his words, to bring the EU to the table. The negotiations were only possible once Britain made it pretty clear that they were very serious about walking away and unilaterally tearing up the terms of the withdrawal agreement, which actually brought the EU into serious talks. Yes, pausing it before Christmas meant that the negotiations had room to grow, but there's absolutely no doubt from the Prime Minister downwards, and don't forget he was the Chancellor sitting in the cabinet that signed off the legislation under Boris Johnson to get that ball rolling. Look, things happen with the EU. For years and years and years, they were telling us all these things were impossible. And I actually do think there's a slight vindication tonight for the DUP as well, in the fact that actually, if you do hold out, all the people that are welcoming these vast movements tonight from the European Union were the same ones saying that the DUP were backwards and looking and were refugees and should just go with the flow. And actually, their holding out and they're walking away from Stormont has brought the European Union to the table, just as the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill does. The reason that bill was paused and not scrapped was because actually it was a negotiation tactic. And I think too many people forget in this country that, there are two sides to this negotiation. It's too quick, I think, to, especially the Remainers in this country, they take it too quick to automatically take the sort of European Union's angle on things, the European Union side and silly old Britain. What are we up to? When actually Sunak has proven, and he was very gracious today to actually point out that these talks started under Liz Truss and have been going for some time. He was gracious enough to admit that this has been a process and one that has worked. So I think we need to look at these things in the round rather than simply assuming that just because he ditched the bill, that's what got the talks going. The bill was the gun on the table that made the talks happen.
I think the whole thing about the process, the process worked.
Sorry, Pippa, I think we just talked over you. I was going to say he praised his predecessors in the Commons to a lot of mirth on both sides, has to be said. Just got the Times through as well. Brexit breakthrough. Sunak secures a deal that grants Britain the power to veto EU laws with a Stormont break. And just to pick up on the points that Harry was making, you know, the DUP feeling vindicated tonight, that the deal that was delivered to them was rubbish, the fact you couldn't get the same stuff in supermarkets in Northern Ireland that were in Great Britain, this idea of the green and red channels, you know, how that would work, because many elements, Geoffrey Donaldson told us, you know, both are for Northern Ireland and for the Republic of Ireland, and this idea of the Stormont break needs agreement from both sides in Stormont, should it resit. So what if the Unionists don't like something, but the Republicans do? It becomes irrelevant as well. So there are questions, aren't there? But my point generally, though, is are the DUP right to feel vindicated tonight, Pippa, do you think?
Well, look, I mean, the DUP didn't like the original deal that Boris Johnson struck. And I kind of think slightly we need to go back a little bit further when we start praising Rishi Sunak. He had a very difficult situation, which he has handled, it looks like, very well, if indeed the DUP do eventually get on board. Although they don't need to back it, they just need to not oppose it vehemently at this point, really, politically, for it to be able to get through. But let's not forget, this was a Tory Brexit deal. This was a Boris Johnson Northern Ireland protocol. He's the one that sold the DUP up the river back in 2019, 2020, when it came to putting that border down the Irish Sea. All these MPs that have been banging on for ages, for years, about how this deal isn't good enough, back the Brexit withdrawal agreement. You know, I kind of think we're slightly rewriting history here when we say that it's nothing to do with MGov. You know, the delay, this could have been resolved potentially, were the political will there. It could have been resolved a couple of years ago, but it wasn't, you know. So I think...
Come on, talk about rewriting.
Yes, as I've acknowledged, it was a difficult situation that Rishi Sunak inherited, and he has been bold enough to face down the rebels, to sort of try and reach agreement with the European Union, to be flexible, to win the DUP. He deserves credit for that. I'm not denying that. But what I do think is that we just need to be aware of where this problem started in the first place. And the DUP walked out. The DUP walked out of Stormont not because of to sort of put the Northern Ireland Protocol bill on the table, but because they weren't happy with the protocol arrangement which Boris Johnson agreed and signed.
Pepper, talking about rewriting history, let's just go back and remember what happened in 2019. Parliament seized control of the process. They totally hamstrung the negotiations. They passed a ridiculous surrender act that basically held a gun to the government's head and said, if you don't sign this bill, then we're going to continue to delay Brexit again and stay in the European Union. It was this deal or no deal or stay in the EU. None of those options were particularly palatable for anyone. And yes, the DUP were unhappy, but there was always going to be a process. Brexit was never, as we said so many times in this programme, Brexit is not a destination, it is a process. You've got to accept the fact that this is actually almost looks to be something of the plan coming together in the fact, this is why I think Boris Johnson is going to end up having to back this deal, even if he doesn't like all of it. It's because actually what happened was they made a conscious decision that there were massive flaws in the Brexit deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol being one of them, but it was that or stay in the EU for even longer and indefinitely. And they basically said, we will go back and renegotiate it. And the process of renegotiating it started almost immediately after the protocol was implemented. And here's where we are. And as you said earlier in the programme, you know, it is about getting Brexit done before the next election. And that's what that 80-seat majority was given to the Conservative Party to do, to get Brexit done. It was an election fought on giving the government a mandate to do this. Yes, it's taken longer than anyone wanted. But the idea that it's somehow, you know, sort of rewriting history suggests that this wasn't part of a sort of longer term strategy, I think is slightly unfair. Yes, it's been messy, but they've got there in the end.
OK, I'm just going to show a few more papers. I know Pippa wants to come back in. You will do shortly. Daily Express, first of all. PM, my Brexit deal now takes back control. Safeguarding sovereignty, of course, he said. Daily Telegraph, again, picturing him alongside the EU Commission President. My deal is a new way forward, a decisive breakthrough being hailed there. And then The Guardian as well, PM hailing a new chapter in relations with the EU after the Northern Ireland deal. In fact, a meeting possibly with President Macron in the offing. We'll talk about more on that after the break. And make or break, that is the headline on the front page of one of the Northern Ireland newspapers as well, the Belfast Telegraph. Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me now, the political editor of The Guardian, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Harry, I'm afraid I'm going to come to you again, actually, because it's your paper and your byline on it. Bangers and smashed it. Sausage wars, this was once described. So I just want to know what people in Northern Ireland will see if this is finally enacted, this Windsor, what's it called? Windsor Framework, or whatever it is. What will they notice? Is it just about parcels and pies and pork sausages? What will they see?
Yeah, I think the most noticeable and tangible feeling of separateness, I suppose, that the Northern Ireland Protocol created was this idea that actually supermarkets in Northern Ireland were unable to stock a vast amount of products, be that sandwiches, chilled meats was the big contentious one, even seed potato. There was a number of things that were being held up just through the vast bureaucracy and red tape and paperwork and customs checks. But hopefully now, once that green lane is set up, as Rishi Sunak slightly unfortunately worded it today in the House, that the people of Northern Ireland will be able to enjoy the same goods as those in the mainland in their supermarkets, which presumably means no tomatoes there either. I think that will be a key issue. Pets, obviously, another one. Drugs has been a really key issue. The fact that actually there was much more strict regulation around medication in Northern Ireland and pharmaceutical goods, which actually are going to be scrapped, and also VAT levels are going to be set back. This is a big win, clawed back out of the sort of European sphere and brought back under Westminster's tax regime. So VAT, duties, state aid rules, they sound technical, but it's very unfair that VAT cut on perhaps energy bills in the UK, in the GB mainland, wouldn't be able to be passed on in Northern Ireland. So things like that will be a noticeable difference. And that's where the DUP need to stay on the right side of public opinion, because if they get it wrong and people actually like this, they're going to be seen as outliers. I'm now going to let Pippa talk because I feel like I've taken up all the energy.
Yes, pets, plants and pork sausages. It's quite a list, is it not? And the local newspapers, the Belfast Telegraph, the Belfast Newsletter, talking about this idea of a crunch time for unionism. Just very quickly, there are benefits of the internal UK market and now the internal single market, Pippa. Should they accept it, do you think, the DUP and others?
I think they'll be under intense pressure domestically to do so. But it is the case that in the last few weeks and months of them opposing the protocol so vehemently, it's boosted their core support, their base in the polls. And there is one strand of opinion that thinks that actually, because it benefits them electorally to do that, they might continue to take that position, or at least to be sort of critical of it until May, after which point they might sort of come on board and get back into a power sharing situation. The big question there, of course, though, is whether they would ever be willing to go into a power sharing agreement with Sinn Féin holding the position of First Minister. So I think we're not at the end of the road on that one yet. Still a lot of to come.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Too much to discuss. Luckily, you're back in a few minutes' time. Pippa and Harry, thank you both very much indeed. Here's the weather now.